Here we are with our Sunday school lesson for Sunday, July the 4th, and it's going to be a great weekend. I know there's going to be a lot of people on the lake. There's going to be a lot of people visiting family and friends, a lot of people on vacation. I think the hospitality industry is very pleased with all of the activity that they're seeing, and it's going to be a great thing. You know, I can't help, though, but reflect on July 4th and what July 4th means to us. And I think we need to do that. I think we need to share that with our families, and we talk about our independence. And I can't help but think, and I think often about the veterans who have preserved that freedom. It came at a price. It came at a very, very big price, and continues to come at a price. And we wouldn't be having the weekend that we have, the celebrations that we have. We wouldn't have the opportunity to worship freely and to spend time together the way we do were it not for our veterans. And so I do want to take a minute and give thanks for that. I saw an article just the last couple of days, and it was an article that was questioning, or the question that was posed was, should the American flag be displayed in churches? And I looked at that, and my first reaction was, that's an argument? That's something that, that somebody has brought up as an issue? And my answer to that, my very clear answer to that is absolutely. In the United States of America, we absolutely need to display proudly our American flag when we go to worship. Our lesson today begins a new 4-week series, and it explores the concept of neighbor. Now, I got to admit, when I opened up the quarterly and I saw the lesson was titled Fenced In, I thought, okay, I wonder what that's about. And then the purpose statement for this lesson that the author put in it was to acknowledge the risk in loving our neighbor. And I thought, well, now that's an interesting take on a subject. Acknowledge the risk in loving our neighbor. And then I went on to read, and anybody that leads the lesson, we have a quarterly teacher's guide, and I went and referred to that, and I kind of looked at some of the ideas that particular author had. And we're going to start this 4-week series, and it's going to explore the concept of neighbor. Now, the first lesson is out of Proverbs, and I wanted to just say this. When I think about Proverbs, I go back and I reflect on Proverbs at different times. And something was shared with me a number of years ago about the book of Proverbs, because I don't know that it's something that most of us pick up on a regular basis. But the question was asked, how do we go about finding a good devotional? How do we find a devotional that we can read every day? We've never really read a devotional before, never been committed to doing a daily reading. And the person that they asked the question to, and I was just standing up by the side, and they said, start with Proverbs. There's 31 books in Proverbs. Read one a day. And just sit down, read one a day, clear your mind, clear your time. And if you've got a spouse, you want to do it as a couple, and then talk about the book, because it's got some wonderful lessons in it, some wonderful lessons that we can reflect on. And I thought that was an interesting idea, and I've actually shared that with a few other people. So this week's lesson will be out of the book of Proverbs. Next week will be out of the book of Ruth. The third week will be from the book of Acts, and we'll see how the early church looked at this concept of neighbor, this concept of neighborliness. And then the fourth week we'll go to Mark's Gospel, and we'll see an example of 4 individuals who were true neighbors to someone in need. Now, I think one of the questions that all of us have, if we really are honest with ourselves and we reflect on this, is this idea or this challenge of how to define what a neighbor is. Because we tend to compartmentalize our thinking. We think of a neighbor as the person next door. We think of a neighbor as somebody that we like to be around. When we need to go to a safe corner on a particular issue or something's going on, we seem to gravitate to certain people. And they're people that have similar interests, similar beliefs. And we think of them as a neighbor. We get glimpses throughout the Bible of what it means to be a neighbor. And our lesson today, as I said, will focus on the passage of Proverbs. And interestingly enough, there's no one passage that you go to and it just says, here's what a neighbor is. And I will tell you, when I look at these different passages, I think it's important the way the writer put these together, that we're going to look at 4 separate passages in Proverbs to try to weave this concept in about what a neighbor is and get a better understanding. The first passage that we're going to look at, or the first book that we're going to look at, passage out of Proverbs 3, 27 through 30. And I'm going to read from the Message. The Message was written by Eugene Peterson. We've certainly referred to it before. The Message is written in more current language, and I think as we look at this, it'd be interesting to do that. The Proverbs were actually sayings of Solomon and messages that he was giving to people. So when we look at Proverbs 3, 27 through 30, it says, "Never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's for that purpose. Don't tell your neighbor, maybe some other time, or try me tomorrow, when the money's right there in your pocket. Don't figure ways of taking advantage of your neighbor when he's sitting there trusting and unsuspecting." Now, that's an interesting start as we look at that. I think of this concept of never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that purpose. Well, that in and of itself is pretty powerful. And I've shared before with you and over the years as I've led different discussions and classes, that when I look at the Great Commission, when I look at what Jesus said with the Great Commission and what we were commanded to do as followers, when he said to go to Samaria, it's so easy to look at that and think, oh my gosh, I mean, Samaria, that was a country, far, far away. Samaria was a place where nobody wanted to go. That's where lepers were. I mean, it wasn't a good area. But we don't have Samaria here. We live in the United States. I live in Cornelius, North Carolina. We don't have Samaria. But I think what he was really saying there, and where the message is to all of us, is that people didn't want to go to Samaria because it forced them to step out of their comfort zone. And so I've always looked at that, and when I think about a passage like this, I believe I'm being told to step out of my comfort zone. And so when it says never walk away from someone who deserves help, your hand is God's hand for that person. Don't tell your neighbor, maybe some other time, or try me tomorrow, when the money's right there in your pocket. And I think what that's saying is, it goes beyond somebody that you know. It goes beyond somebody that lives next door. But we're being asked to go out of our comfort zone. Now, I will admit that and I've been pretty aggressive about trying to address needs. If I see somebody that needs something, and I try to respond to it. And I've waded into situations, Judy and I have shared stories, we share stories with each other, that we waded into situations that when we got into them, we probably weren't equipped to be there. It's always worked out, and I think by the guidance of God it's worked out. But sometimes you're not equipped. And as I've matured, as I look at different situations, I will admit I'm a bit more cautious than I used to be. But I still have this great sense of responsibility for other people. I have this great sense of responsibility that we need to help people anywhere we can, whenever we can. And one of the challenges with that is it's so difficult to do sometimes without judging. When we see somebody on the road, or we see somebody that could be a family member, just somebody in our community, or in somebody that we see on some kind of a regular basis, and we want to judge them. I heard a story this week, and I listened to talk radio when I drive around, and there was a story on there about Billy Graham, and very often one of the commentators I like to listen to references Billy Graham. And the story was about the fact that Billy evidently, and Jim Baker is a figure that is very prominent in North Carolina. Jim Baker went to prison for bilking people out of millions of dollars to build a theme park, to build a lifetime community for them, and then did not follow through. And so Jim Baker went to prison. He got out of prison. He served his time. He got out of prison. And he was destitute. He had nothing. And evidently, and I'd never heard this story before, evidently Billy Graham allowed Jim Baker to come to Black Mountain, where Billy lived, and gave him a place to stay. He also provided an automobile for him, and he gave him a little bit of money to buy basic needs for food. And somebody asked Franklin, Billy's son, why he did that. Because Billy talked about sinners. Billy talked about sin and needing to be repentant of sin. And here was somebody who had sinned, who had taken advantage, very high profile on a national basis. And Franklin said he wondered the same thing. And his father told him, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to love. And I thought that was powerful. Because there's a guy that it would have been real easy to just shun, to walk away from, to stay away from. And yet Billy Graham said, no, I'm supposed to love. I'm not here to judge. God will judge. God will judge our sins. And we need to forgive, and we need, because we are forgiven. So this theme that we've got here in Proverbs 3:27 through 30 is more a theme of neighborliness instead of just how to be a neighbor. We're cautioned in this passage to not withhold good. Don't be stingy. And that can come in many forms, and I often don't think about that. There was a story that I read, it's been a number of years ago, about Luigi Tarisio. And he was a master violinist. He spent his limited income buying the finest instruments. He had 246 violins that he hoarded, kept in every nook and cranny of his apartment, but no one ever heard the music because he kept them to himself. You think about it, here was this master violinist, had this beautiful talent, who had all these wonderful instruments, but never shared the gift. And so I think it's important for us to constantly be remembered to not be stingy with our resources. And our resources go way beyond financial resources. I've thought about this the last couple of days. My oldest daughter and her husband and her 3 children decided kind of at the last minute to make a quick trip to Ohio to see my folks. And they hadn't seen them in a while, and they just decided that, you know, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren had been asking about their grandparents, and they see pictures and they wanted to see them. And my first concern was for traveling on a holiday weekend, but then I got to thinking about it as the pictures were coming in when they were with Grandpa and Grandma. And I was thinking about how special that is. About, you know, my granddaughter is 8, and the youngest is 3, and his memory of his grandparents probably won't be great, but he's seen pictures. And I do believe that because of the love that I could see that my parents were sharing with those great-grandchildren, they will remember. It is a blessing that they share that love with them, because for the rest of their lives they're going to hear about their great-grandparents and what their great-grandparents meant to their parents. And they're going to be able to remember that because they shared that with each other. They shared that love. And I believe they will remember that. Sometimes, as this passage refers to, it's not convenient. We remember from the Sermon on the Mount, the golden rule, do as to others as you would have them do unto you. And we're reminded of that because sometimes it's not convenient to share. It's not convenient to stop and take care of something. It's not convenient to take time away from something else to spend time with somebody in need. And in verse 29, we're reminded to not harm someone who is in our sphere of influence. It's a sin of commission, not omission. But it can be in the form of there's somebody that we're irritated with that's in our sphere of influence. We just want to share some dirt on them. We want to tell somebody else, you're not going to believe what I know. And in doing that, we could potentially cause harm to them. Apostle Paul warned us against accusing without a reason to accuse. And sometimes we get caught up in that if we're not careful. And then we go over and we look at Proverbs 6. And again, that's an interesting passage. In Proverbs 6:2, it says, "Dear friend, if you've gone in to hawk with your neighbor or locked yourself into a deal with a stranger, if you're impulsively promised a shirt off your back and now find yourself shivering out in the cold, friend, don't waste a minute. Get yourself out of that mess. You're in that man's clutches. Go put on a long face, act desperate, don't procrastinate. There's no time to lose. Run like a deer from the hunter, fly like a bird from the trapper." Now, we think about that, we think, oh, well, that tells us don't be guaranteeing loans for our neighbors. It certainly says don't be guaranteeing a loan for a neighbor unless you know two things, and I think that's important. One is that you need to know them intimately enough that they have the resources to pay back the loan. If you're going to guarantee a loan for them, make sure that they're going to be able to pay the bank back or whoever they borrowed the money from. But if they don't, and it's possible they won't, it will not impact your life if you have to pay that loan back. If the situation starts to turn south, this passage tells us to distance ourselves, get released from the situation. I've laughed before. My father used a term, and he's used it many times. He said there's just sometimes you have to unhook, and you want to be part of the solution, but when you know that it's not going in the right direction, you have to unhook and get away from it. Our lesson goes on to talk from Proverbs 14. There is, and I'll say this because you've got the quarterly in front of you, the quarterly does not have, it kind of jumps from Proverbs 6 in terms of the reading and goes right to Proverbs 25. So don't think you've missed anything. It's referenced in the quarterly, but it doesn't go ahead and give you the words to read, so you'll have to look those up in your own Bible. But it also goes to Proverbs 14:20. In Proverbs 14:20, it says, it's criminal to, well, it starts out by saying, an unlucky loser is shunned by all, but everyone loves a winner. It's criminal to ignore a neighbor in need, but compassion for the poor, what a blessing. Isn't it obvious that conspirators lose out while the thoughtful win love and trust? I mean, this passage is a great passage. It starts out by saying everyone loves a winner. But on the other hand, those that are kind to the needy are happy. Sometimes that happiness is referred to being blessed. So yeah, people love winners. But when we're really being kind to our neighbor, to the people that are closest to us, our sphere of influence, when we're paying attention to the needy, we become happy. Anybody that's ever served a meal to somebody who is homeless, anybody who's ever worked for Room in the Inn, which our church participates in, and hopefully we'll be starting to do that again this winter, they feel happy, they feel good. And sometimes that happy word in the Bible, through translation, becomes blessed. And 14:22 really drives the point home. Isn't it obvious that conspirators lose out while the thoughtful win love and trust? And then we go to finish up our lesson today, we go to Proverbs 25:20. In Proverbs 25:20 we read, singing light songs to the heavy-hearted is like pouring salt in their wounds. If you see your enemy hungry, go buy him lunch. If he's thirsty, bring him a drink. Your generosity will surprise him with goodness, and God will look after you. A north wind brings stormy weather, and a gossipy tongue, stormy looks. Can't make it any more plain that we have to serve people in need. We can't dismiss the needy. I sometimes think, and again I refer to my father a lot because he's obviously been a great influence on me. I think sometimes we want to dismiss the needy just by saying, well, I'll pray for you. And yes, prayer is important. It's very important. But just praying without taking some action to assist them is not enough. We need to get involved. We need to help them. I think about Judy's dad and what a great person he was. Anybody that knew him, he was one of the kindest, gentlest people I've ever met. And he would tell stories. Here's a young man on the front lines in World War II. And he told stories about meeting German soldiers. We were at war, the Great War. We were at war, and he would talk about how those soldiers, those captured soldiers would sit down and show pictures of their families. We were at war, but there was a love there between them. There was a bond there between them. They had families to go home to. They had jobs to go back to. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in our individual wars that we don't take time to love. We don't take time to step back to understand. This passage tells us, this group of passage tells us to always be kind and to love. Zig Ziglar, I refer to Zig often, had a passage or a quote that he used to say, and I think of it often. He said, "You can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough people get what they want." And I think that's so true. Friends, we need to love. We need to open up our hearts. People are hurting. People have been hurt, and they're going to continue to hurt. And it's our responsibility as followers of Jesus to comfort them in their time of need. Will you pray with me, my friends? Our gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for our country. We give you thanks for the veterans that have made this free. We give you thanks for their sacrifice. We give you thanks for our families and our friends. And we ask that we go throughout this week, you continue to guide us and to lead us. In His name we pray. Amen. I love you, my friends, and I will see you again soon.